The rain came in sheets, a steady cascade that blurred the edges of the world. Charleston's outskirts were quiet this time of night, the long stretch of highway lit only by the occasional glow of a passing car and the rhythmic flash of Naomi Carter's windshield wipers. She drove with practiced ease, her posture straight, her hands at 10 and 2. The rhythmic hum of her car's engine was the only sound, save for the rain pelting against the glass. Naomi Carter was exhausted but content. She'd spent the day with her family, savoring the warmth of home-cooked meals, the laughter of her nieces and nephews, and the quiet pride in her father's eyes as he asked about her latest assignment. As a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy, Naomi was no stranger to challenges. She had spent years navigating a world that didn't always welcome her, a black woman in a position of authority, but she carried herself with unshakable dignity. Tonight, she was just trying to get home. The highway was nearly empty when she noticed the faint glimmer of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. At first, Naomi thought nothing of it. Perhaps it was an emergency vehicle heading to some late-night call, but as the lights grew brighter and a sharp siren pierced the air, she realized they were meant for her. Frowning, Naomi signaled and pulled over to the shoulder. She glanced at her speedometer. She hadn't been speeding, and mentally ran through her evening. No rolling stops, no broken taillights. She couldn't think of any reason she might have been pulled over. Still, she reached into the glove compartment for her registration and insurance, resting them on the passenger seat next to her military ID. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw the officer step out of her cruiser. The woman was tall and broad-shouldered, her uniform pristine, her walk brisk and purposeful. The name on her badge glinted as she approached. Officer Whitaker. Naomi rolled down her window, the rain-soaked air rushing in as she offered a polite, "Good evening, officer." Whitaker's face was set in a hard line, her eyes narrowing as she shone a flashlight into Naomi's car. "License and registration," she barked, her tone sharp, almost accusatory. Naomi handed over her documents without hesitation. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Whitaker ignored the question, her gaze lingering on Naomi's military ID. Her lips curled into something that might have been a smirk. "You've got a broken taillight." Naomi blinked. That was impossible. She had checked her car before the long drive. "I don't believe my taillight is broken, officer. Are you sure?" The smirk disappeared, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Are you questioning me?" Whitaker snapped, her voice rising. "Step out of the vehicle." For a moment, Naomi hesitated. She had dealt with her share of power-hungry individuals over the years, but something about Whitaker's tone set her on edge. Still, she kept her voice calm. "Officer, is there a reason I need to step out of my car? I'd like to comply, but I also have rights." Whitaker's jaw tightened, and her hand moved to rest on the holster at her hip. "Are you resisting? Step out now." The rain seemed to grow heavier as Naomi unbuckled her seatbelt. She stepped out into the downpour, her military ID still clutched in her hand. Whitaker loomed over her, the flashlight now trained directly on her face. "Hands on the car," the officer ordered. Naomi complied, her pulse quickening. She could feel the cold metal of the car beneath her palms, the rain seeping through her clothes. "Officer, I'm happy to cooperate, but I need to know what's going on." Whitaker didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed Naomi's wrist and twisted it behind her back. Before she could process what was happening, Naomi felt the cold bite of handcuffs against her skin. "You're under arrest for resisting an officer," Whitaker said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Let's see how untouchable you are now." The rain fell harder as Officer Whitaker shoved Naomi toward the back seat of the cruiser, barely giving her time to process the situation. Naomi's mind raced, her military training kicking in to keep her emotions in check. Fear was there, lingering at the edges, but she buried it beneath a layer of calm calculation. She'd faced hostile environments before, but this, being treated like a criminal for no discernible reason, felt different. It felt personal. "Officer," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her, "I don't understand why I'm being arrested. I've complied with every instruction you've given me." Whitaker slammed the car door shut, her face twisted into a cold sneer. "You talk too much. You people always do." The words hit Naomi like a slap. She had heard such veiled racism before, but hearing it from someone wearing a badge, a symbol of supposed justice, cut deeper than she cared to admit. She schooled her face into neutrality, refusing to give Whitaker the satisfaction of seeing her react. As Whitaker settled into the driver's seat, she picked up her radio and relayed the arrest in clipped, confident tones. Naomi caught snippets of her words through the divider. Resisting, suspicious behavior, possible contraband. Her stomach churned. Contraband? What was this woman trying to pull? The cruiser pulled into the station 20 minutes later. The rain had eased by then, but Naomi's clothes were still soaked, her hair dripping water onto the cuffs of her jacket. Whitaker yanked her out of the back seat with unnecessary force, leading her into the dimly lit booking area. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the tiled floors and metal desks. Inside, a few officers glanced up from their work, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to discomfort. One younger officer, his face pale and unsure, opened his mouth as if to say something, but Whitaker silenced him with a glare. "I've got this," she snapped, dragging Naomi toward the booking desk. Naomi could feel their eyes on her, their silent acknowledgement that something about this wasn't right. But no one spoke up, no one intervened. They watched as Whitaker searched Naomi's belongings with an almost gleeful fervor. "Empty your pockets," Whitaker ordered, tossing Naomi's phone, wallet, and keys onto the desk with unnecessary force. Naomi complied, her movements deliberate. "I'd like to speak to my attorney," she said calmly. Whitaker laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "Oh, you'll get your phone call, but let me be clear. You're not walking out of here tonight. People like you think you're above the law, but you're not. Not here." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she refused to rise to the bait. "I'm not above the law, officer. I respect the law. But I'm also entitled to basic rights, and I'm confident this situation will be resolved quickly once the facts come to light." Whitaker leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think your Navy badge means something to me? You think it makes you special? It doesn't. You're just another perp in my station." Naomi met her gaze, unflinching. "And you're just another officer who's forgotten what her badge is supposed to stand for." The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, Whitaker's confidence faltered, her smirk slipping into a scowl, but she recovered quickly, gesturing to another officer to take Naomi's fingerprints. As Naomi was led to a holding cell, she couldn't help but notice the tension in the room. The younger officer from earlier avoided her gaze, his hands trembling slightly as he worked at his desk. Another officer, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, watched Whitaker with barely concealed disdain. It was clear that not everyone in the station approved of what was happening, but their silence spoke volumes. The cell was small and cold, its walls lined with chipped paint and graffiti. Naomi sat on the narrow bench, her hands resting on her lap. She could feel the weight of the injustice pressing down on her, but she refused to let it crush her. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, centering herself. This wasn't the first time she had faced adversity, and it wouldn't be the last. She had fought her way through a military system that had doubted her at every turn, proving herself time and time again. She would fight this too, but she would do it with dignity. She wouldn't let Whitaker or anyone else see her broken. Hours passed. The station grew quieter as the night wore on, the occasional murmur of voices and the clatter of keyboards the only sounds. Naomi remained composed, her mind running through the steps she would take once she was released. She knew her rights, she knew the law, and she knew that Whitaker had overstepped. Badly. The courtroom was packed, its usually quiet chambers buzzing with hushed whispers. A handful of reporters sat in the back row, their pens poised and ready to record the proceedings. The case had gained traction in the community, largely because of Naomi Carter's status as a decorated Navy officer. People wanted to know what had happened on that rainy highway, and whether justice would prevail. Naomi sat at the defense table, her posture as straight as ever. She wore a crisp navy blue suit, her military insignia pinned to her lapel. To anyone watching, she exuded calm confidence, but inside, her nerves were coiled tight. This wasn't just about her, it was about something much larger. She knew the outcome of this trial could set a precedent, one way or another. Her attorney, Aaron Delgado, stood beside her, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for taking on cases of civil rights abuses. Aaron had a commanding presence, her every word calculated, her every movement deliberate. Naomi trusted her completely. At the prosecution's table, Officer Lauren Whitaker sat with her lawyer, her expression as smug as ever. She leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, her confidence unshaken. To her, this was just another procedural hearing, a formality before she was exonerated. After all, she had the badge, the authority, and the system on her side. Or so she thought. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, entered the courtroom, and the bailiff called for silence. This court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Margaret Hensley presiding. Defense, you may proceed with your opening arguments, the judge said, her voice even but firm. Erin rose to her feet, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She stepped toward the jury, her eyes scanning their faces. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you will hear a story about power, about how it can be abused, and about how it must be held accountable. My client, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Carter, is a decorated officer who has served this country with honor. Yet, on the night in question, she was treated not as a citizen deserving of respect, but as a target to be humiliated and silenced. Her voice rang clear, each word landing like a carefully aimed blow. The evidence will show that Officer Whitaker abused her authority, fabricated charges, and violated Lieutenant Commander Carter's rights without cause. We will prove that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a disturbing pattern of behavior. Whitaker shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the first crack in her otherwise impenetrable facade. Naomi caught the movement out of the corner of her eye and felt a flicker of hope. The trial progressed with methodical precision. The prosecution presented its case first, relying heavily on Whitaker's testimony. She painted Naomi as combative and uncooperative, emphasizing her supposed resistance during the traffic stop. Her lawyer backed her claims with vague references to officer safety and the need for reasonable suspicion. But when it was the defense's turn, Erin Delgado dismantled their narrative piece by piece. "Let's start with the body camera footage," Erin said, her voice sharp as a scalpel. She clicked a remote, and the courtroom lights dimmed as the footage began to play on a large screen. The jury leaned forward, their eyes glued to the video. It showed everything: the rain-soaked highway, Naomi's calm demeanor, and Whitaker's aggressive tone. The footage made it clear that Naomi had complied with every instruction, her voice steady and respectful even as Whitaker escalated the situation without cause. "Officer Whitaker," Erin said, pausing the video at the moment Whitaker handcuffed Naomi, "can you explain why you deemed it necessary to arrest my client at this point? She was compliant, was she not?" Whitaker shifted in her seat. "She was argumentative," she said, her voice defensive. "I felt she was a threat." "A threat?" Erin raised an eyebrow. Lieutenant Commander Carter, a decorated Navy officer sitting unarmed in her vehicle, was a threat to you? Whitaker hesitated, her confidence wavering. She questioned my authority." Erin nodded, her expression unyielding. "I see. And is questioning an officer's authority a crime, Officer Whitaker?" The courtroom was silent. Whitaker's lawyer tried to object, but the judge overruled him. Whitaker's hesitation spoke volumes. But Erin wasn't done. She had saved the most damning evidence for last. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge, "the defense would like to submit additional evidence into the record. This includes a series of complaints filed against Officer Whitaker over the past 5 years." The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant and prejudicial." "Overruled," Judge Hensley said, her tone sharp. "Proceed, Ms. Delgado." Erin turned back to the jury, holding up a thick folder. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is a record of Officer Whitaker's misconduct, complaints from citizens, internal investigations, and disciplinary actions that were quietly swept under the rug. These documents show a pattern of abuse, targeting minorities, fabricating charges, and using excessive force." She handed copies to the jury, their faces growing grim as they skimmed the pages. "This is not an isolated incident," Erin continued. "Officer Whitaker believed she was untouchable because the system allowed her to be, but not anymore." Whitaker's face was pale now, her earlier arrogance replaced by visible panic. Naomi watched her squirm and felt a surge of vindication. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment the truth came to light. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, their decision was clear. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Carter, not guilty of all charges." A wave of relief washed over Naomi as the words sank in, but the real victory came moments later, when Judge Hensley addressed the courtroom. "Furthermore," the judge said, her gaze locking onto Whitaker, "this court recommends an internal investigation into Officer Whitaker's conduct, as well as a review of the Charleston Police Department's oversight policies. Abuse of power has no place in our justice system. Naomi sat back in her chair, her composure finally giving way to a small, triumphant smile. Justice had prevailed, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by someone who thought their badge made them untouchable. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Naomi and Aaron, their cameras flashing, their questions flying. Naomi answered with grace, her voice steady as she spoke about accountability, resilience, and the importance of standing up against injustice. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about ensuring that no one, no matter who they are, has to endure what I did. Change starts with accountability. And I believe we are one step closer to that today." As the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped below the horizon, Naomi felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in days. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now she could rest, knowing she had done her part to make the world a little more just.